Hey, your pal Sully is back from New York. And ironically, I got stuck in Las Vegas.
You are Locked On A's, your daily Oakland A's podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, A's fans, and welcome to Locked On A's, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast where we talk about your Oakland A's all season long. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I've been a baseball podcaster for well over a decade now, and this is my my sixth full season here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where I'm normally the host of the Locked On MLB podcast. I'm still the host of the Locked On MLB podcast, but I'm doing double duty. I'm double doing it. Easy for you to say as a host of Locked On A's as well. Follow us at Locked On A's on Twitter or whatever it's called now. And you can follow us on Instagram, same handle. I'm your pal Sully, Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Tax Network USA. Did you know it's never too late to resolve your tax issues with the IRS? Don't wait. Reduce your tax debt and get help from a licensed tax professional. Call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. I've been in upstate New York for the last week, which is why there have been some evergreen episodes and a couple other episodes which you saw recorded on location. And you're going to see some more stuff later on. But I'm back in California. My flight back from Buffalo had to be. I had a stop in Las Vegas, and I was delayed there for 3 or 4 hours. And I just thought, oh, how appropriate that the host of Locked On A's is in Las Vegas against his will and here longer than he'd like to be. But I actually, if I was delayed for a couple of more hours, I probably would have gone and done a on location podcast there. But I didn't, and I digress. It's funny that one of the things that happened when I was away in upstate New York is, as I said, I wanted to record a bunch of shows ahead of time so I could enjoy my time and not be racing to get a podcast, but to make sure you all got a podcast anyway. And when you've been on the West Coast for as long as I have, you forget about time changes. And one of the single greatest things about living in California, living in the West Coast, are the night games start at 4 p.m. here. If you get the East Coast games, they start around 4 p.m. And then when the A's play, it's around 7 at night if they're playing at home, if they're playing on the West Coast. And I'm out in Buffalo, I'm in Niagara Falls, I'm in Syracuse, I'm in Cooperstown, I'm all around upstate New York. And the A's games start at 10 at night. And sometimes I'm doing stuff in the morning. And as someone who was born in the East Coast, and I lived many, many years of my life in the East Coast, I forgot about how awful that is. How awful it is. And going, Christ, it's 10 o'clock and the A's games just started. And there was a couple of times I thought maybe, the A's are winning. Maybe I should stay up and do this. And no, Sully, you've got stuff you got to do in the morning. You're meeting people and everything like that. And wow, there were 2 instances this last week where I went to bed going like, well, when you get up in the morning, maybe do an updated, because obviously the A's won that game, right? Right? No. I left for New York on Friday, and the A's didn't win. They won a walk-off game against Toronto, the first game day I was there, and they haven't won since. But it's the way that they've been losing that's the major kick to the groin. Yes, between Saturday, I'm now recording this on a Saturday, they have not won a game in that stretch. That's not good. It's never a good idea to lose a week's worth of games. But yeah, they got the doors blown off them on Saturday. But on Sunday, they lost a walk-off game, or they lost an extra inning game. All right? One which they had a chance to win that in the ninth inning. And then they go to San Diego. All right, San Diego's a very good team. They kicked the snot out of them in that first game. But then they lost a walk-off game on Tuesday. And they had the great comeback, which I was asleep because I was on the East Coast. I had something to do in the morning. So I woke up and I looked at the highlights. And there was another walk-off loss then. And then they had the tough loss, the first game in Minnesota. And then they had a lead last night while I'm in Vegas watching the A's fall apart. How many games? Extra inning loss, 2 walk-off losses, and another game where they had an early lead. You can't pat a team on the back for trying. Trying's understood. But I have a philosophy, and that is, when a team goes on like a 7-8 game winning streak, and it's in April or May, and some people say don't get excited. The thing I say is it's never the wrong time of the year to win a week's worth of games. Conversely, it's never the right time of the year to lose a week of games. And while there is a sense of resignation that many of us are probably feeling regarding the A's team, there's a sense of, well, what did you expect from the A's team? I expected them to show up. We saw that when their first, through the game that I was at on May 4th. Remember that? Remember how fun that was? I was there in the game on May 4th. I was in Oakland. There was the 3-hour rain delay, but then the game starts. They're playing Miami, and they smacked Miami around. They won the series, and they had won a bunch of series in a row. They were on a winning streak at that point, and they had climbed to 500, 17-17. Again, it's always the right time to go on they went on a 6-game winning streak at that point. They won 20-4. They got to 500, and every one of us said they're going to play Miami again tomorrow. They could be above 500. They're going to be playing Texas and Seattle and Houston. They could actually make inroads. They were only a game and a half out of first place. That was May 4th. Since May 4th, since that day on May 4th, when the A's were 17-17, the A's have not won 10 games since then, and they've nearly lost 30. They're 9-28. 9-28. Do you know who's been worse than the A's in that stretch? Nobody. Not the White Sox, who have been playing sub 500, sub 300 ball since that point. Not the Cubs. The Cubs, by the way, are in an absolute nosedive, an underrated nosedive since then. But the A's are 9-28. Since that game I was at in Oakland, the A's have won fewer games than the Celtics, who don't play every day and have been in the playoffs and have had a bunch of off days and everything like that. The A's are behind them. And you take a look at, I'm just here, and I'm not here to to smack us all in the face, but you had the Corey Seager home run. All right. You had the 12-11 loss to Texas in the finale. You had the walk-off loss to Houston and the 3-0 loss to Houston. You had close games that they lost in Kansas City, including the 5-3 game. You saw the 4-3 loss to the Rockies. You saw back-to-back walk-off losses to Tampa Bay, including that 12th inning one where Miller had the lead in the 9th. You saw the 3-1 loss and the 4-2 loss in Atlanta. You saw another one-run loss to Seattle, and you saw back-to-back walk-off losses to San Diego. And this is all in less than a month and a half. It's been a nightmare. It's been exactly what I didn't want to see happen with this team, which was they're starting to lose the kind of games that make you, throw your hands up in disgust. But we will see. But one thing has happened. There's a number that happened that we can all see as this season is falling apart. And I find that maybe sociologically, it's an interesting number. Hey, Prize Picks, it's the #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It's the most fun, exciting way to get in on the action as you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more than or less than on 2 or more player stats, ever a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you can turn $10 into 1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more than or less than on 2-6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. And the NBA Finals, they could be over tonight. The Celtics could still win more games than the A's in a stretch, and the Finals will be more on Prize Picks, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select basketball stars that you're not going to find anywhere else. And you can now win 100 times your money with baseball-only lineups on Prize Picks. If you submit a winning lineup featuring 4 demon squares, you'll cash in big time on some of the biggest moments in the first half of the baseball season. Now, what I would do right now, whatever we have for Jason Tatum today, go more than, because he is on a roll. He wants to justify a huge contract and win a title with the Celtics, and that is easy peasy. And did I mention lemon squeezy? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Download the app. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. Then do you know what? In the end, it's really that easy. Hey, Policygenius. There they are. Policygenius is the #1 leading marketplace for life insurance. And I got to start thinking about that. I'm 52. Approximately 1/3 of my life is over. And I need to have a peace of mind in case something happens to me, like the A's, that will make me need to have life insurance to provide for my family. Life insurance you can get through Policygenius. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million worth of coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. And some options offer same-day approval and those exams and some of the other red tape you need to go through, forget about it. Policygenius will find you the right policy. Life can be unpredictable, like that copy. And Policygenius can take away some of the worries of what your family would be doing in case something happens. It gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found their best fit for their needs with Policygenius. Check life insurance off your to-do list with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnMLB. Click on the link in the description and get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you can save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnMLB. Hey, where's your hub for sports news, for sports takes? A lot of stuff going on here. You may see the Stanley Cup hoisted up. You may see the NBA Finals crown. You got to have the NFL draft before you know it. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories in all the world of sport. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channel app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. a lot of numbers get thrown around, and a lot of analysis gets thrown around. No one does that more than the A's, who were in the forefront of a lot of statistical analysis and this, that, and the other thing. But we're going to see something, and it's going to be interesting to see if this continues. This slide by the A's is coming at the worst possible time for the people who hate Fisher and people who want to defend the A's and people who want or defend the Oakland fans and keeping the A's, on the A's in the East Bay, and that the narrative is going to continue that, well, no one's there, no one's going to show up, they shouldn't have a team. I heard that a lot when I was in Cooperstown, and I had my A's jacket, I had my A's hat on, and I met a few A's fans along the way. But we struck up a conversation with some other fans, and they're kind of like, "Yeah, well, it's too bad, but no one shows up to the games. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, they put a good team out there, and no one showed up." Now, that's the narrative that's going on in the world beyond Yuba City. That A's fans, it's your fault. You didn't show up. Now, we know the difference. We know the stadium's falling apart. We know we know that they strip mine the team of any recognizable players. I mean, who are the players that are the building blocks of this team? Seriously. I mean, they'll stumble across a Miller, who's a nice piece. They'll stumble across picking up a Rooker who turns into an all-star. But who is the foundational pieces of this team that they're building around? Who is their star prospect that they could say, all right, here's our foundation? Even if it's a piece that doesn't work, like you saw, they tried to do that in the White Sox a few years ago. It didn't work, but they had at least pieces that they were trying. There are no pieces like that on this team. And if anyone shows up and does a good job, they're going to be traded, before you could say Yoenis Cespedes. Rooker's going to be traded. And probably Urseg, and probably Miller, and probably any pitcher who shows their stripes. And by the time we get to August and September, it will be a AAA team out there on the verge of losing 110 games with expensive tickets, no fan amenities, and a crumbling ballpark that has feral cats living in it. And then people outside of the Bay Area will say, well, you should show up. That's the narrative. And it's going to happen even more so because people are going to look at this team and say, I don't recognize these names. The team stinks. The stadium stinks. I don't want to give Fisher any money. And you're going to see absolutely tiny crowds in the Oakland Coliseum. I'm going to show up. I'm sure some of you will too. But here's the number. 7,000. 7,000 people are going to show up every day. The A's have treated their fans as horribly as an organization has since the days of the Montreal Expos. And with the Expos, it was weirder because they didn't have an owner for a while. They removed the owner and MLB ran it. It was an intense conflict of interest, of which the Expos in 2003 and 2002, two of their last 3 years they were in Montreal, they actually had winning teams, and they contended for a wild card spot. And actually, the Expos drew 1 million fans in 2003, despite the fact they had no owner, they had no budget. Everyone knew they were going to leave town. What they had a star. They had Vlad Guerrero on that team. Made sure he was gone by 2004. 2004, the Expos had their final season in Montreal. Everyone knew it. They were going to Washington the next year. And they were playing in see if it sounds familiar, a crumbling stadium, an ownership that at that point didn't even exist. Any decent player immediately got traded away. And even though they had some contending years on low-budget teams, they just stripped mine the team. And the fans were like, why are we going to go to this horrible ballpark that's literally falling apart for a team that's just going to leave? That team drew 749,000 for 2004, averaging 9,253 paid customers. Last year, the A's drew 832,000 meaning that 10,000 people showed up on average every game. There were some days more, some days a lot less, but that was an average game. Look at this year. This year, we know they're gone. We know the owner has put a gigantic middle finger in everyone's face. We know that everything that Fisher has done has been bungled beyond recognition. We know that the stadium is in disrepair and dirty. Let's face it, when you're there, the counters look dirty. The place you put your food down looks dirty. Everything looks dirty. It doesn't look swept. There's nothing about it that feels clean. There's no stadium amenities. In fact, when they had to bring your dog to the ballpark day, that none of the water fountains were working in the sections where you're supposed to bring your dog. They didn't even think to turn on the water fountains. Half the stadium's tarped off. And what's there is too expensive. And yet they don't put a winning product on the field. They don't have any foundational prospects coming on the team. You say, well, at least that player is worth watching. And Miller's excited. He's going to be traded. And 6,890 people still show up every day. Instead of saying, wow, what a small crowd, be in awe that nearly 7,000 people show up a day. Despite all of that, is there any better praising of the loyalty of A's fans than 7,000 people will show up? Now, yes, right now it's a little under 6,890 show up per game. In the summertime, you're going to look up and go like, oh, geez, the A's stink. Why go? Why give them money? But I guarantee you that number will be 7,000 by the end of the year. 7,000 people will show up no matter what you do to them. So, and, in Montreal, it was about 9,000. But they didn't have a second baseball team there. And that was a slightly different situation. It wasn't much better, but it was a slightly different situation. But that being said, if you're not from the Bay Area, please, please, please don't trash the A's fans, because 7,000 a day show up despite an ownership that has demonstrated nothing but contempt for them. Now, we here at Locked On A's, we pride ourselves on giving you the latest news for your team, whether it's offseason, the draft, or this mess in Sacramento. But the news for the A's is year-round, but something else is also year-round. Collection seasons. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS is going to stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank account, seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Do you know what you need to do? You need to get the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. It doesn't necessarily mean you're avoiding taxes or being a tax evader. I have done a lot of work for media companies and different companies. Some of them would pay me in cash. Some would pay me in 1099s without the taxes taken out. If I didn't have someone looking after me, I could owe a lot of taxes without even knowing it. That's why you need to have people like Tax Network USA going to bat for you. They've got over 14 years experience, an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau. Tax Network USA has saved clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe tax or have complicated matters like I did that require tax planning, or you finally hit a big pile of money and you need to correctly file it, what you need to do is you need to call. And the number's right there below me, right there. Call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. You got to see the link in the episode description below. But go to Tax Network USA. They're there to help you. Hey, one more reminder that Locked On MLB is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And they've launched the first ever National Sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channel app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts on the Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channel app. Hey, I did miss an episode this week. I will make it up to you all. I will. I will do one more episode because I wanted to have five. I wanted to have five a week. Just a quick one for the. I bet you forgot they were on the A's. Willie the Wonder, Willie Horton. Not the person associated with the Michael Dukakis campaign, but the wonderful all-star World Series champion for the Detroit Tigers, mainly for the Detroit Tigers. He played for the Tigers from 1963 to 1977 and was a absolute staple in Detroit for over a generation. And when the team emerged from the ashes after years of being good, but not good enough to beat the Yankees, they wound up being pennant winners in 1968, nearly in 67. But he was a tremendous defensive player, defensive outfielder who played that outfield with Al Kaline and Jim Northrup, which was a wonderful defensive outfield. And he had tremendous power. He wound up hitting 325 home runs over his career. And that's back when it was a real pitcher's era. So 300 home runs when the bulk of your career was in the 60s was a lot. He was a four-time All-Star with the Tigers and was a very, very important voice in the community when there was a lot of racial tension, horrific racial tensions brewing in Detroit in the 1960s. The African-American Willie Horton, alongside the superstar Al Kaline, became an important 1-2 punch of creating some sense of unity. And Horton was very visible and very vocal of going out to some of the riot-torn streets and trying to preach an aura of, let's work this together. I mean, when they won the World Series in 68, that was the same year Dr. King was shot and RFK was shot. It was a excuse me, a horrific time for that period. And his part of that team, of being part of that community then, and being a huge part of the World Series, including throwing out Lou Brock in a key play in the World Series and getting some big hits as the Tigers stunned the defending world champion Cardinals, and continued his all-star play in the 1970 and 73 and being a part of when they went to the playoffs again in 1972. He is to this day a beloved member of the Tigers community, wound up being a special assistant for the general manager and has been a coach and everything like that, and beloved. But by the end of his career, he kind of bounced around a little bit. And I remember he was someone, and this shows you when you're collecting baseball cards. My first memories of Willie Horton were not as a Tiger, but as a Ranger, because my first card I had of him was a Ranger. And then the next year I saw he had a Blue Jay card. The next year he had a Mariner card. And I never associated him at first with the Tigers, because my first bunch of times knowing him was my baseball card with these bouncing around every year. And yes, from 1963 to 1977, only the Tigers. He played one game with the Tigers in 77. 77 played for the Rangers. 78 played for the Indians, A's, Blue Jays. And then 79 played for Seattle and actually had a nice comeback. He wound up hitting 29 home runs in his comeback season with the Mariners. But when he started getting bounced around like crazy, at one point he was traded to the Cleveland Indians, and then he was cut by the Indians. And this is when Charlie Finley was in his craze. He lost all the stars, but if a recognizable player was there, he would grab him. And Willie Horton was available. He was just cut by the Indians in July 1978, and was almost immediately signed by the A's. And he played a month with the A's in 1978, a terrible A's team. But that month, he played 32 games, and do you know what? He played pretty well. He batted .314. He got a couple of home runs, and he had one day in particular where he shone big time, when in a game against the Chicago White Sox. And this is when the A's I said they were a terrible team. At this point, they were trying to get back into contention. And at this point, It was the middle of July, and they got their nose above 500 at one point. And part of the reason was a day that Willie Horton wound up going 3 for 5 with a home run off of former Red Sox pitcher Jim Willoughby. And the A's wound up winning that game 7-4. And this was a very strange A's team because, as I mentioned, they were above 500 in July, and they had thoughts of maybe they could be a surprise contender. Now, they finished as a 93 loss team. So just think about what that means for that, how they did. If they were above 500 in July and they finished the season with 93 losses, that's pretty grotesque. That's a grotesque finish. And I'm going to go quickly here, but I'll just tell you that after letting go of Willie Horton at the end of basically the beginning of August, the A's, needless to say, went on a little bit of a slide. Because they were still they were 4 games above 500 going into August, and they finished the year 13-42. Maybe they should have kept Willie Horton. Well, I'm going to do another show that'll drop tomorrow. We'll cover to see how the A's are going to lose the Friday game. But follow us at Locked On A's on Twitter and on Instagram. By the way, I'm going to be doing, a couple of people have talked to me about my Raiders episode and had some thoughts about that. I am going to address that. I'm also going to address some people who are asking me to go on Locked On MLB and trash Fisher. I'm going to later today. So follow us at Locked On A's on Twitter and Instagram. I am your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Shaking our heads, but hoping we get something. At least 7,000 will show up. This has been Locked On A's for the 14th day of June 2024. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.